Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We'll continue as the temple is doing with the next verse. That's 2232, Srimad Bhagavatam. And I'll just recite the Sanskrit. Ete shratite nripaveda gite tvaya biprishte cha sanatane cha yevai pura brahman ahatushta aradito bhagavan vasudevaha. Translation, Your Majesty, Maharaj Parikshit, know that all I have described in reply to your proper inquiry is just according to the version of the Vedas, and it is eternal truth. This was described personally by Lord Krishna unto Brahma, with whom the Lord was satisfied upon being properly worshipped. Aradita. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The two different ways of reaching the spiritual sky and thereby getting emancipation from all material bondage, namely, either the direct process of reaching the kingdom of God or the gradual process through the other higher planets of the universe, are set forth exactly according to the version of the Vedas. The Vedic versions in this connection are Yada sarve pramuchante kamayesya hridi shritaha atamarchyo mrito bhavati atra brahma samashnute. Brihad Aranyaka 447 and also Brihad Aranyaka Teir Chir Abhisam Bhavanti, or translation, those who are free from all material desires, which are diseases of the heart, are able to conquer death and enter the kingdom of God through the archiplanets. Unquote. These Vedic versions corroborate the version of Srimad Bhagavatam, and the latter, that Srimad Bhagavatam, is further confirmed by Shukadev Goswami, who affirms that the truth was disclosed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna Vasudeva, to Brahma, the first authority on the Vedas. The disciplic succession holds that the Vedas were uttered by Lord Krishna to Brahma, by Brahma to Narada, by Narada to Vyasadeva, and then by Vyasadeva to Shukadev Goswami, and so on. So, there is no difference between the versions of all the authorities. The truth is eternal, and as such, there cannot be any new opinion about the truth. That is the way of knowing the knowledge contained in the Vedas. It is not a thing to be understood by one's erudite scholarship or by fashionable interpretations of mundane scholars. There is nothing to be added and nothing to be subtracted, because the truth is the truth. One has to accept, after all, in italics, some authority. The modern scientists are also authorities for the common man for some scientific truths. The common man follows the version of the scientist. This means that the common man follows the authority. The Vedic knowledge is also received in that way. The common man cannot argue about what is beyond the sky or beyond the universe, semicolon. He must accept the versions of the Vedas as they are understood by the authorized disciplic succession. 2 more sentences. In the Bhagavad Gita, also, the same process of understanding the Gita is stated in the 4th chapter. If one does not follow the authorized version of the acharyas, he will vainly search after the truth mentioned in the Vedas. So there's a lot of ingredients in this purport. I mean, the launching point is everyone, here in this case Shukadeva Goswami, but as Prabhupada says, even the personality of Godhead, Krishna, Brahma Sutra, Padais Chaiva, refers to authority. And the authority being the Vedas, because the Vedas are directly manifest by the Supreme Person. And therefore, the Vedas are the authority. Like the common example Prabhupada would give is the authority of who is the father is the mother. So the Vedas disclose who the father is, or the origin of emanation of all things. And how is one going to understand the origin of emanation from all things? Well, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, you can't unless there's disclosure, beginning verses of chapter 10. This group, that group, the other group, they can inquire, but they'll never understand. By that inquiry method, speculative method, the ascending process, they'll never understand. Why? They'll never understand. Because what existed before they existed, cannot be experienced by those processes. Because they existed before they existed. So how can you know? You know, perhaps, maybe, in my opinion, and it may not even give that preamble. They may just say it's like this. But they can never know. And so it's not, a challenge can be presented, or it just can be factually stated. They cannot know. However good they are. And for another point, for common people, they also accept an authority, and the authority is the scientist. And the scientist has his authority, and that's A or B, his sense perception or his inference, logic and reason. And that's based on sense perception, and then the processing of that information, the sense information, sense data, processed by their mental capacities. So imperfect senses, subject to illusion, tendency to cheat. So that's not the best source, but everyone has to follow some authority. I mean, we've heard it a million times. When Prabhupada met Professor Kotovsky, he said, what's the difference between your philosophy and mine? You have to accept some authority. Yours is Lenin. I accept some authority. Mine is Krishna. How is our process different? We have to accept some authority. Now, that was in dealing with a communist person who accepted the authority of Lenin. And according to Lenin, or according to those who are relying upon their senses and their reasoning power, common conclusion is there's no life after death, because how can you know about on that end any more you can understand the other end? What existed before you existed, or what's your existence going to be after this one? Well, you don't know. So you can say, some say, there isn't anything. This is it, and that's that's a common brand of materialism, Charvak Muni. That is, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die, and there's nothing after this, so just enjoy. Hedonism. It's not a new thing. There's different brands, but it's not a new thing. But such people also accept some authority, and they may cherry pick who their authority or authorities are, but the principle of accepting authority is there. And so, for Prabhupada, commonly, not just with Professor Katofsky and accept the authority of Lenin, because that was where he was, where that was the way in Moscow. But in the common world, Prabhupada knew very well that it's the scientist. And so the principle of accepting some authority, but how can a scientist know what existed before he existed? Well, ask the scientist. Just a little anecdotal sharing. I remember very clearly one time when visiting in Houston, I was invited by the, what's it called? Indian Graduate Student Association, IGSA, to speak on mysteries of the sacred universe. That was an interesting, Indian Graduate Student Association, mysteries of the sacred universe. And in the three models that Sadhuputta speaks about and explain them. And one of Sataputta's points is, if you don't accept the Vedic version, then where are you? You're at the position where either there's life is meaningless. In short, there's no purpose. Where does everything come from? And if it's Big Bang, so then this, for example, the empirical information of modern science. This is a little detour, but the empiric data of modern science is getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the empiric data of the Vedic model. Structure of the universe. Very different in describing it, but just looking at the numbers, the empiric data is getting closer and closer. For example, in ancient cultures around the world, the picture of cosmology was Earth-centered, geocentric. Copernicus came along, said, no. Not Earth-centered, sun-centered. So, and then with that picture, the structure of our solar system and the size of planets and the distance between one planet and another planet, and for example, the distance between the Earth and the sun, and he gave a number. Heliocentric model with a certain number, the distance. And that was revolutionary. And as time went by, the distance between the Earth and the sun, using more technology and more technology and more technology, it has gotten closer and closer and closer to the empiric number of the distance between the Earth and the sun from the Vedic model. Now, one is geocentric, the other's heliocentric. This is over there, it's just an example. But with the ability to calculate using the Vedic model, the ability to calculate distances and movements of planets, and the relative positioning of planets, there's a Vedic system for that. And then over here, there's the heliocentric system for that. It's using technology, the senses extended by machines, or refining the capacity to perceive and measure. So one picture, the heliocentric picture, says everything came from a Big Bang. And the other picture says everything comes from God. So at the end, where's everything going to? And so there's two pictures of the modern conception. As from the Big Bang, things just expand and expand and expand and expand and eventually dissipate into nothingness. Or the other option is, at a certain point, it implodes back upon itself and goes into whatever it came from, the chunk, or something. But it starts with nothing and ends with nothing. So I was placing before them the concept. This is Sariputta, which would you rather have? A model that says everything comes from the Supreme Person, or everything comes from nothing and returns to nothing? That's the upshot of why the Vedic model is a more pleasant model, a more attractive model. So one of the persons, PhD, said they've calculated through physics and math, they've calculated down to the nanosecond what happened after the Big Bang of movements of things. And I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what he said. And then, and similarly, what's going to happen when the gravitation force no longer is working, and it has to do one of these two things: implode or dissipate. Which, okay, it's, one can spend one's life calculating such things, using senses and extended capacity of the senses, something that's undeniably imperfect, and then the ability to process that information is undeniably flawed. And that's the basis. And the starting point is nothing, and the ending point is nothing, or two varieties of nothing. And another is everything, where the numbers are quite similar, but everything, so everything comes from a person. And everything returns to a person. And we're persons in between, not just chunks of matter flying around space. There's no soul. And the challenging scientist would say, where's the evidence? Somebody sent me a video of one very prominent British atheist who was traveling around speaking atheism from the science perspective. And in an interview, it was like, angry, show me the evidence. Like, excuse me, but the senses don't have the capacity, and the reasoning power doesn't have the acumen to exactly what's in the purport here, to understand what's beyond the senses. Adhoksaja, he who's beyond the senses. What existed before you existed? No way to know. You can speculate, and that does go on. And what's going to exist after, that can be speculated, what's going to go on. But so they can't know past or future, so what to speak of even present? therefore, the sentence, that some authority has to be accepted. The common man follows the version of the scientist. This means that the common man follows the authority. The Vedic knowledge is also received in that way. The common man cannot argue about what is beyond the sky or beyond the universe. He must accept the version of the Vedas. Now, he doesn't must, but means if you're going to know for certain what exists beyond the capacity of the senses to perceive, there isn't a way to know other than by authority, and the Vedas are the authority. Now, where does this fit into this morning's verse? This morning's verse is Shukadeva Goswami is now wrapping up an extended explanation to a question that comes at the beginning of this chapter. And he is concluding that what I've stated is according to authority. Now, how does he know? Well, how can you know anything? According to authority. And for him, the authority is his father, who received his knowledge in disciplic succession, Brahma, Narada, Vyas, Shukadev. And Sukadev, as I'm only expressing what I've received from my father, who received from Brahma. Anyway, so from Narada, from Brahma. That's the system. That's the authoritative system by which one can know something. Now, here comes a question. How can you, okay, let's just say, I accept that that's the means of knowing, but how can I verify? Verify meaning, how can I experience it? Because if I don't experience it, how can I verify it? That's one idea that people have. Well, you'll never know until you follow the authority. One can have faith, but it's not a blind faith. It's an authoritative type of faith, and then to experience transcendence, what's beyond the capacity of the mind and the senses to know or experience. It requires faith in that authority. And when faith in that authority is demonstrated, I'll say it again, when faith in that authority is demonstrated, then the authority can disclose. It's exactly what Krishna says in chapter 10 Bhagavad Gita. No one knows, but Arjun, I'm going to disclose it. And he states that the Chaturashloki verses of the Bhagavad Gita, because I'm disclosing it to you, Arjun, because you're a worthy recipient, which is what is said in this verse. The verse says, this was described personally by Lord Krishna unto Brahma, with whom the Lord was satisfied upon being properly worshipped. Referring again to a verse from Bhagavad Gita that I've been hearing maybe 12 classes Prabhupada gave over a period of time in different locations, 410 Bhagavad Gita, Vita Raghavaya Krodha. So there's the overcoming some things, Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha, and they're resting upon the same thing, but there's different directions of moving. But, fear, Bhaya, Krodha, frustration, anger, Raga, attachment to material happiness. So if one can let go of those three things without going into the 12 times Prabhupada described it, that one can become purified. Letting go of those things, one can become purified by jnana and tapa. So what is, for us, jnana is that which comes connected with bhakti. Say it the other way. Jnana is not that which is born of one's speculative powers. That's not what jnana is. It's not the jnana that Krishna is speaking of in Bhagavad Gita. The jnana is the experience and realization. It starts with faith in the authority, but realization of reality that's beyond the temporary. No, we have faith, we, all of us, have some faith, and based upon that some faith, we're engaging in bhakti, and based upon that faith we have in bhakti, we're getting some realization. Unless our submission slackens and then we get more covered again. But some faith that carries us forward in the bhakti process. And corresponding to that faith, the very next verse, 4:11, Ye tamam prapadyante. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly, or reciprocate accordingly. So our realization is going to be, and our experience is going to be, according to our prapadyante. And then comes this explanation that everyone is following my path in all respects. Meaning, Prabhupada's explanation, there's the direct and there's the indirect. And the indirect is the scientist. He's searching for happiness. He's searching for knowledge. But happiness, ananda, and jnana or vijnana arise from bhakti. He's searching, but indirectly. And he's getting something corresponding to how Krishna reciprocates with him. And Krishna reciprocates with him according to his regard for Krishna. And the world has got, unlimited variety of how people have regard for Krishna. And therefore there's unlimited ideas. And that can be confusing to someone who's searching for truth. Bhaktisiddhanta wrote a whole essay with several parts to it, Search for Truth. It's the Brahma Jigyasa, it's inquisitiveness. That's the starting point. Or the Adau Shraddha. I want to know, and I have faith that there is something worthy to be known. Prameya, there's something to be known. And the means to know that something is pramana. So if I use my senses as pramana, or the scientist as pramana, then I'm not likely to get transcendence, understanding, and experience. So resting on faith is the point, and the faith must be, as Shukadeva Goswami is saying, it's connected to authoritative source, and one becomes qualified to receive from that authoritative source when one is properly inquisitive, not predisposed, but properly inquisitive, and tapa. And then one attains Krishna's nature. One attains Krishna's nature. Then one gets that experience. And the experience is not a worldly experience. It doesn't compare to anything of this world. It's otherworldly. And those who are not faithful will never experience it. They'll deny it or give it a name or something, but they'll never experience it. And that's, their choosing. They get what they want. Krishna's reciprocating with their indirect approach. And there's many, many indirect approaches. And in this purport, Prabhupada is narrowing it down to two, then subcategories. So one is direct and the other is indirect. And the indirect, from the Vedic perspective, from this Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, I'll read. Those who are free from all material desires, which are like diseases of the heart, are able to conquer death and enter the kingdom of God through the archie planets. So I spent a fair amount of time looking for where else does it describe the archie planets. And all I got was Prithu's queen. King Prithu's queen was Archie. So the archie planets, Archa, it has to do with, it's the best I can understand. This is intuitive, not other. But the chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita, the path where the yogi travels through the path of light. So that's the yoga process, and as the chapter 2 is dealing with the yoga process, the goal of which is Paramatma feature, but it brings one to the position of what the previous verse was saying, purified state, and connecting to the personality of Godhead. It doesn't start there. It starts with accepting the indirect process, but the Vedas lead to Krishna. Vedas desire vayar aham eva vedyo. Even this is the point. Even the indirect methods lead to Krishna, if they're followed sequentially. Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes like this, that one's position in spiritual life can be described according to the particular practice that one follows and the faith that one has, and one may be identified according to that position if one doesn't go further. Like step number 3, then step number on a stairway, step number 4. If you stay there and not continue to progress, then you may be identified as such and such yogi or such and such practitioner. But one who's in this progressive method, then one may be identified with the next, and then the next, and then the next. And the bhakti process is the direct. It's, as Prabhupada has given us, the elevator method. And there's a risk or a built-in problem with the elevator method, and that is we may take for granted you just press the button, go to the top floor, and voila, I'm qualified. And that happens with bad character and bad speech. It's not very cultured. And the other process sifts out the bad character and bad speech and no culture, because you have to have, those are passageways through that indirect process or gradual process. So that has its refinement benefit, but it's very, very long. And who's going to stay with it? Very, very rare, especially in this age of Kali. So the direct process is recommended. And those who take to the direct process have a big opportunity and a big responsibility. And that's to develop the character and speech and behavior that corresponds with one who's received that mercy, the mercy of the elevator method, the direct bhakti method. It gives a bad name to bhakti when persons who are practitioners of bhakti speak badly, behave badly, and do hurtful things to each other and to others and nature and so forth. So it's a life of responsibility. That's not an intimidation statement. It's just like it's a responsibility statement. We must be tuned into what refined speech and refined conduct and refined character are like, and therefore we're requiring ongoing mercy from the great souls, from our acharyas, from our predecessor perfected personalities, and our contemporaries who are living that life, and sadhu sangha message here, and try to take on qualities like they have. During the Manashiksha seminar, one of the references, interesting, was made by Ravana, who spoke some truth. And he was educated, highly educated. Degraded, but highly educated. And he gives the example of a Vaidurya stone. And a Vaidurya stone is a type of stone that takes on the color like the surroundings around it. It reflects the color and even the tone of the color of what's around it. So similarly, the mind, and then go, our character. So he's speaking to Prahlad, who his character was not formed by associating with his father, although there was certainly association with his father. It was his internal absorption in what he had heard while still in the womb from Narada. That was his character and his quality and his speech. So bhakti life requires like that, actually taking shelter in a very strong way, taking shelter, not a casual way, in an ongoing way, taking shelter, deeper shelter, and refining and refining and refining further, because that shelter principle will manifest proper conduct, proper character, proper qualities. Even someone who's covered or conditioned or unfortunate or something. And therefore it's part of our part of our Vaishnava culture to feel not qualified, but not feel badly about ourselves because we're not qualified. Therefore requiring these two things. I must make a very strong effort because I'm not so qualified. And second, I must receive lots of mercy. And you still have your hand on the steering wheel. You're still careful about how you speak, about how you act, and the character which you display, the manner in which you carry out your life and interact with others. And we're all short of, what we know the standard could be, should be. But we keep moving with those two primary features in place. Striving through association and calling for mercy. Feeling not so qualified, but calling for mercy anyway. This is Rupa Goswami's teaching as well, Ashabandha. I'm unfit, but I'm shameless. I'm asking anyways. And I'm asking because I know that you're kind. Prahlad Maharaj says the same thing. I'm unqualified, I'm unfit to speak. But the demigods are asking me, and I have courage to do this because I know that you're very kind and you'll accept. Even what I offer in prayers and praise is inadequate. But you're kind, you'll accept. And that's the mood of bhakta. Resting with faith on the kindness of Krishna and the representatives of Krishna. And we move away from the unqualified to become qualified and keep moving. Okay, so there's text 32. I'll read it again. Your Majesty, Shukadeva Goswami is addressing Maharaj Parikshit. Your Majesty, Maharaj Parikshit, know that all I have described in reply to your proper inquiry is just according to the version of the Vedas, and it is eternal truth. This was described personally by Lord Krishna unto Brahma, with whom the Lord was satisfied upon being properly worshipped. So let's see if there's some discussion. Yeah. You're far more calm this morning. What happened? You have nice rest last night? Uh-huh.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, this is just like an understanding of what I've understood from this lecture this morning. I was actually thinking about a question which was really well answered in this, especially the last part of today morning's lecture. And for a person who is absolutely new, and they're not young, they're in
A
their
person who is what?
new. They have
New, a new
yeah,
person.
they have
Okay.
no clue about Krishna consciousness or anything. They don't know if it's believable, if it's trustable, if it's worth their time, energy, and surrender. And that can be a really, uncertain and risky feeling for them because, when you're young, it's quite easy, especially if you've if you're 4, 5, 6 years old, you just do it and then you develop the taste and experience and understanding. But if you're older, then you have so many things to think about. You're like, oh my God, will I waste my time if I, spend my time doing like studying or chanting? And for people who are very like materialistically oriented, it feels like wasted time. So it's just the faith is what the first step you have to take to, experience and understand. Or is it possible for just, without any faith, for you to just become purified by being around devotees and taking association of Shastra?
Yeah. The purification will be incremental, but purification for sure. You come in contact with something that is pure, that there's purification. And then different things happen from Krishna's side. He may put their life in some disarray, and then they may be an impetus to take more seriously that option that they weren't considering so seriously before. It may be there's so many things. There may be that they simply appreciate the kindness and good character, good quality of the Vaishnava or Vaishnavas with whom they're associating. And that can be an impetus because they like what they see. That can be a new person. It could be family members and relatives and people like that. Where at least the beginning of their bhakti life, that's of increasing their bhakti life, is they appreciate the qualities that they see. And that even unspoken internal appreciation is good. That's progress. What to speak of if they say it to others. Prabhupada would speak like that. The Hare Krishna people are nice. Now knowing, and that's something we should live accordingly, knowing that some people are going to say the Hare Krishna people aren't nice. And there can be different ways. I'm thinking at the moment of the story that Urmila told that she heard from Nityananda Prabhu about how Nityananda Prabhu in Dallas became a disciple. You didn't hear that? Was in, oh, you were off with the youth group. Okay. It's a short version. Nityananda Prabhu was an esteemed lawyer and lived very near the Hare Krishna temple in Fiji. And the Hare Krishna temple in Fiji weren't so thoughtful or careful or respectful of the neighbors, because when they have a kirtan, they had speakers that blasted the kirtan all around the neighborhood, loud. So Nityananda didn't like it. And being an influential person and having connections with influential persons, he wrote a letter to some influential persons complaining. And then when Tamal Krishnaraj came, he heard, this part is not so clear, but at some point, he invited Nityananda to come see him, knowing his, worldly position, and made an offer. And the offer was, you practice this and this and this and this, 16 rounds, offer your food and come in 10 Mangala. You follow the process of bhakti for 30 days. And if you're not convinced within those 30 days, then I'll close up the Fiji temple. And if you are convinced by the process, by actually following, you have to actually follow, but you actually follow the bhakti process. If you become convinced this is a genuine process, then you will have to write letters to those same people that you wrote nasty letters to, and speak, clear up the the trouble that you created. So he agreed, and he followed, and in 15 days he accepted. And then he wrote the letters that he had promised to write. So that's a different way of getting people involved in the bhakti process. Now, it must have been that Tamal Krishnaraj had confidence in the character of Nityananda, as well as confidence in the bhakti process. So, but that's kind of comical. The norm, that's not the norm. You have something. Let me just add one thing. A very important reconfirmation of providing good association for new people where they feel cared for, they feel personalism. No, my observation is we're better at this in the Hare Krishna movement with new people than with our regular devotees, where people are extended to in a caring way. But those 100 people that came to that event in Gita Nagari that knew nothing about nothing, the people that you're describing that actually knew nothing, they weren't like on the fence about, should I, these other things in my life are important to me. Am I wasting my time? Anyway, the feedback after the event, because I was sent some of it, I don't know if they're all like this, but there was a consistent thread of every single person that I interacted with. I felt such care. I felt such personalism. I felt so, an atmosphere was created where we could just be very open and speak things in a forum, because a lot of it was interactive, that we would know that otherwise not share with anybody. And so, the hearts were opened by, in many cases, when people do come back to a gathering, it's to be with the person who they connected with. It's that person, that relationship, that's most meaningful. And it doesn't stop with that. It goes on. And so we'll be busy devotees with giving, good association, etc., etc. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So in the process of bhakti, we always hear that the first is adhau shraddha. So at least we need to have a little bit faith.
Yeah.
But what I am hearing is, even if a person, he may not have a faith, but he is associating with the devotees.
Agyata Sukriti is what happens.
Okay. So how do we really put that faith? Is it, the faith could be like, oh, I like the way the devotees are dealing with me.
It can be anything.
Anything that
They like the prasadam. They like the festive mood. I mean, Rath Yatra is a very good example. People's experience the display of bhakti in an unrestricted way. No, the behavior and conduct of the devotees is important, but they may be attracted to different things. You know, the colorful carts. The person who was serving prasadam in the prasadam line, and it can be different things. And they have some, their heart is touched, and they feel something. And they move on and do, their everyday stuff. Isn't it? I mean, public. I'm sure it's the same when all these nice pictures we saw of the book distribution that being arranged here in Florida, North Florida. They're hanging out doing whatever they do and da-da-da-da-da, and then there's a moment, and then that moment makes an impression. And there's different things can touch different people. Yadabar last night reminded me of a letter that he received from somebody that saw, not during the preliminary showing, but something that came from Amazon.com, and they saw the movie that he made and the steps that they went through, and now they're practicing devotee. So different things can happen for Krishna is very mysterious and very kind, touching the hearts of people in different ways. So it's not that everyone, the outcome is we want as many devotees as possible. We want to touch as many hearts as possible, and it can be the incremental, unknowing devotional service. It's like one of the rules for book distributors is if even whether they take the book or not, they left with a good impression. And same with everything that we do, in the workplace. That whether they know or they don't know that you're a devotee, you're a devotee. And if they feel some appreciation for you, and it's unknowing that the basis of that is the bhakti that's within you, they're getting some benefit. Little drops. I travel a lot, and I'm very clear. It's very clear. People are evaluating the whole Hare Krishna movement based upon how I behave. They're not meeting the Hare Krishna movement, they're meeting one person. And the things that they comment about are like, hey, I really like those colors. Or something. But whether they say or they don't say, it's a responsibility to, on the outside and most important on the inside, to be an emissary of bhakti message. Is that all right?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay. Upananda?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. In reference to a verse you quoted this morning, I think it's 411, Yetama Papadyante. I have a difficulty really understanding the last part, that everyone follows my path in all respect. Especially, my understanding is that eventually, the non-direct process, indirect process.
The way that Prabhupada explains it is in this purport, but it goes a little bit further than what's in this purport. It's indirect.
When I think of this verse, Tanaham, Dushata Kuran, Samsareshu Nararama, Shipami, Ajasram, Ashubam, Ashrishwa Eva Yonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, the lowest among men, I perpetually cast in the womb of demonic species. Perpetually. That means.
So how are they following Krishna's path in all respects?
Yes.
If in that case,
Yes.
that's your question.
Yes.
It's indirect. You know, the one of the ways that Prabhupada explains this is the state builds a prison. They have laws, and the law abiding people are protected. The law breaking people are put in jail, or they're corrected. So the persons who are in jail can say, I don't accept the authority of the government. But they're accepting the authority of the government. So the indirect, in such a case as you're identifying, the authority of Krishna is there. They're rebellious, defiant, and etc. But that's Krishna's path. It's the path of correction of the miscreant. Let's go back and just, why creation? Somebody asked me that question once. Chinese lady. First time I met her at Rath Yatra. Here's a nice lady, she's liking. I just have one question, why creation? And it's another way of asking, is this part of Krishna's path? It's part of Krishna's path. It's inescapable because the authority of Krishna is there for the demoniac persons. And he doesn't interfere with free will, misuse of free will. He doesn't dictate because that wouldn't be free will. But it's his path. It's the path of punishment or the path of reprimand or the path of the house of correction, not just the house of detention. That's his path. He's from Krishna's side, the intention is to correct.
Perpetually, this is the word of
Yeah, okay. If one doesn't mend his free will choices, if he doesn't get the message, that's the consequence. But he doesn't interfere. Now, here's the good news. You're the perpetually question. At the end of this age of Kali, Kalki liberates them all. And what liberates means what? They become freed from the reactions, Satya Yuga begins, and they take birth in Satya Yuga. They still have free will. They didn't get merged or something. They get freed from the reactions. And that's Krishna's path. It's still perpetually means it's still dependent upon their choice. They can be killed by Kalki and Satya Yuga begins and take birth in Satya Yuga and you still say no instead of yes. But it's more favorable to say yes because it's Satya Yuga. And they've already been cleansed of all those reactions. I think you for something like this, because I've thought this thought before, the perpetually word is like, wait a minute. So think of it, it's as long as free will is exercised that way, it's perpetually. There's cleansing, there's not just reprimand, house of correction. There's good association available for such people, but Krishna doesn't force. That's the perpetually. It's the resting on the individual's free will. That's what's perpetual.
Again, on the flip side, I was thinking that no matter how one is non-devotee, how bad he is, how bad a criminal, so to speak.
Yeah.
If with the Harinam Sankirtan, if he is passing and he hears the loud chanting,
There we go.
that can awake this dormant Krishna consciousness, which is in
Yes.
everyone. And that, in this case, this-
Okay. So that's the flip side, but then it doesn't address your doubt. That specifically doesn't address your doubt about the perpetually. There's a remedy for the disease, for the criminal, for the miscreant, spirit become cleansed. Okay, someone else? Behind you? Directly behind you. Directly behind you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. My question is from the one of the purports in the fourth canto. Prabhupada says in the even the impersonalist is to enter into the Brahman, he has to execute devotional service. So what is the kind of devotional service? The
Indirect. Pretty weak. It's a path. It's one of the paths that Krishna makes available. And it's indirect. And it may even be, offensive. Or denying the existence of. But it's a path. Pretty weak. Not favorable. There's also varieties and degrees of that, the attitude towards Krishna. Like we read yesterday evening, that the followers of Patanjali, there's varieties. And there's varieties of consequences based upon the regard, the nature of the regard for Krishna. So it's indirect. It's another one of the indirect as opposed to the direct. Bhakti, siddhi, they're indirect.
The reason that question is coming, Maharaj, personalist is having at least a basic conception of Krishna is a person, and then personalist doesn't have any that conception. And what is the bhakti that they will do?
I understand the question. It's the same answer. It's indirect. Like the materialist, or like his question of, the criminal. It's not bhakti in the higher sense of bhakti. It's an indirect sense of bhakti. It's a path that Krishna gives. It doesn't come to him personally. It comes to something else. But it's negation of involving the senses in seeking pleasure through sense contact with sense objects. That's part of the process. And that's an uplifting process. But negation isn't positive. The indirect isn't positive. So your question is, how is that considered bhakti? It's indirect. It's not yet direct. So let's give the microphone to her.
Hare Krishna, sorry, came late. I've heard that impersonalists often have Radha Krishna deities that they worship, but their goal is, when I become self-realized, then I'll merge with them or something like that. Would that be considered a kind of indirect bhakti,
Yes,
like what
yes.
you're talking about?
Yes. Yes. Very good. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Wondering if you can share a bit about this part of the Bhagavatam that we're reading here, about this progression that Shukadeva Goswami begins from the universal form to the Paramatma feature to Bhakti, and then throughout the second and third canto, how there's a focus on the universal creation, and how that by by contemplating or understanding the universal creation, how does that help us in our Krishna consciousness?
Good question. My response is there are different audiences in the world. The Srimad Bhagavatam audience is the world, and there are different segments of that audience, and some require, as I'm sure quite familiar, they require a conception of a person to go towards the ultimate goal. And so in a useful way, the universal form helps them take that which their senses can perceive and gradually form a personal conception through viewing the world. And then there's levels and levels and levels and levels and levels. And one of those levels in the universal form has to do with aside from the materialists, then the meditators, the yogis. And the yogis who meditate on the universal form, they may have, there's different varieties of yogis that meditate upon the universal form. One of them, Tamal Krishna Maharaj writes this in his Sri Brahma Samhita commentary that never got published, but I have a copy. At the beginning of Brahma's day, part of his morning sadhana each morning is he meditates on the universal form because he's got to build the universe. So he meditates because, it's like the contractor looks at the blueprint before he starts to build a house. And before the blueprint comes, the architect who designed the house or build structure, whatever it is. So Krishna is behind everything, and for different purposes, there's different ways of interacting with the universal form. Another is the common question that thoughtful people ask: where does everything come from? And how does it come into being? So it's useful. The process of creation, which includes the elements for creation, and then the structure that's built with those elements. If you and I don't understand all those details, it's not a prohibition. You can't go back to God until you understand all those details. It's not like that. But it's progressive to help people get a full picture of all that is, because part of all that is the universe in which we live, and which is just a small portion of all that is. But to understand that is it's one of the 10 essential teachings in the Bhagavad Purana. So it's there because it's an extension from Krishna. It's part of understanding Krishna is to understand the world around us. Or as Sadhuputta puts it, one sentence, the way we view the world has a very serious impact on how we view ourselves. Supposing you don't have a clear idea of what's the world around you, your idea of yourself may be muddled, will be muddled. And so it's giving a clear conception of the world around us. And so understanding oneself, self-realization, includes these things. So there's different levels or stages or purposes. Let's do the online question.
Maharaj, my wife is asking this.
She's awake.
I have been trying to practice the act of seeing Krishna's hand behind the events in my life.
Like losing her luggage.
How can I explain this vision to others who believe God is giving me hard times?
Well, your smile is one of the best evidences, compelling evidences. When you're smiling inside, although you're being given a hard time, you're smiling inside and you're smiling outside. Even the person who's complaining, God is giving me a hard time. They will be the best lever to help them move to a different position. There's many other things you can say, but that's the most important thing. So we wanted some things to say. Depends on the person. Supposing they're a faithful person, then you can say something different than a faithless person. The faithful person is, I'm responsible for my past misdeeds. And the process of bhakti has the power to relieve me of the reactions of my past misdeeds. And if that's the case, then why is God giving me a hard time? It can be what's verse from Brahma Samhita I like very much. Yastvindra Gopama Devendra Mahosva Karma. What for devotees, it's not karma, it's purification of our past wickedness, tendencies, and eradication, uprooting of the root cause of our material existence, which is ignorance. So Krishna is being very kind to you by helping you to uproot your very cause of material existence. That's what's going on. Now, it's easier to say that when you feel otherwise. That's the difficulty. But it's something that you can say for a faithful person. For one who doesn't have the same kind of faith, one could say, past misdeeds have their responsibilities. You may not remember what those past misdeeds are, but for sure, there's past misdeeds. Otherwise, we wouldn't take birth. We wouldn't take birth. We would go to the place where there's no more birth and death. So when you're experiencing the consequence of past misdeeds, don't blame God. Blame look within. I may not remember what past misdeeds I've done, but I know that difficulty comes to one who does misdeeds. The world may not notice, but the laws of nature notice, and I'm responsible. When a criminal is put in prison, they can complain about being restricted by discomfort being in the prison, but the reason they're in the prison is because of bad conduct, law-breaking conduct. So here we are. Anything else? Srila Prabhupada ki.